Hey everyone, welcome back. First off, this video is going to be in two parts. Hopefully it'll let me get the first part out just a little bit earlier, and maybe people prefer this format, who can tell. Today I want to talk about meritocracy and some of the problems that arise from it. This video draws from some very modern texts, some from 2020 that reference coronavirus as well as Trump, notably Michael Sandel's book, The Tyranny of Merit, and goes all the way back to the first use of the word meritocracy in Michael Young's satirical essay, The Rise of the Meritocracy. This video will focus primarily on the US and the UK because most of what discourse exists either focuses on or was written there, but it applies to most capitalist and Western societies today. I'm sure you can find parallels in your own country. Part 1. Merit, Meritocracy, and Meritocratic Thought. Merit is an interesting thing. It is a word that implies goodness or praise or worthiness. But to use a more strict definition, it's a type of social currency. Merit is a way of placing a claim on something that you believe you deserve, usually in a moral sense. It's said that if an idea has merit, it deserves to be considered. You might argue that your work has merit, so it deserves to be continued or funded. If you are meritorious, you have merit, and thus deserve something. The way we use the word differs, but I'll be using it mainly in this personal sense of what we deserve. Notice these are all value judgments, they're not black and white. Merit to many people is closely linked to your income, which is a very new mindset. It relies on the curious connection between making more money and contributing more to the free market, which in turn improves the livelihoods of everyone in that market. That idea has its own flaws, obviously, but we won't go into that here. A simple objection to the idea that income correlates to merit is the example of a drug dealer, or if we want to use a more extreme example, a drug kingpin who sells thousands upon thousands of dollars of drugs every day, versus a teacher who might make a few $100s a day. One makes more money, but is not at all morally responsible. We will call them harmful or bad. The other makes far less money, but we would normally call them good, or at the very least morally neutral. Again, these are obviously judgments of value, and not all of them are as clear-cut as this. There are jobs which are very important and highly valued, or more difficult, more demanding, and for that reason we decide they morally deserve higher income, so they are more meritorious. So with that in mind, what is meritocracy? Roughly speaking, it's a vision of a society in which power, wealth, and privilege are awarded on the basis of merit, not by birth or status as in an aristocracy, for example. This is both to combat inequality and to increase productivity, and give people the chance to live out their potential. What people are usually saying when they say they want to live in a meritocracy is either they feel they work harder than their pay suggests, i.e. they have unrecognized merit, or that a certain subset of people earn too much because their pay suggests they work harder than others, and that we have an overly inflated perception of their merit. The word has come to mean, in a simplified sense, people getting what they deserve, which sounds unobjectionable at first, but as soon as you go deeper into those implications, there's much more to it. The first coining of the phrase meritocracy was by British sociologist and politician Michael Young, who wrote in his satirical essay The Rise of the Meritocracy about his historian in the year 2033, looking back on the development of Britain from a future that is devoutly meritocratic. In the book, the unnamed historian notes that a true meritocracy of talent has finally emerged. This is a utopian world for the narrator, but clearly a dystopian vision for the reader. The very vague formula given for how this fictional society determines merit is IQ plus effort equals merit. To make that a bit more comprehensive, on one side you have talent, genetics, ableness, IQ, education, basically things that allow you to exert yourself in the form of work. And then on the other side of the equation, you add that to your effort, your time on the job, how hard you're trying, everything through which you apply your energy to using your talents, and the sum of these things supposedly determine your merit. Your merit then determines your career, income, job perks, political power, and even how much public funding is spent on education to develop you to be the most efficient person possible. If someone's IQ is not high enough, you don't waste good education improving them. That's better utilized on people of higher potential. But there's more to this equation that you don't see. Discrimination, bias, perception, and just a fundamental lack of being able to quantify both the effort and talent side of the equation. In Young's book, the system is also at first easily corruptible. Wealth allows people to alter the equation because they have more time to work on things that are more meritorious than others, while others in poverty have to spend time doing things that simply keep them alive. As the meritocracy progresses, however, efforts are made to further reduce any mitigating factors to a person's IQ, so that the state fully decides whether someone gets those opportunities to progress. Michael Young's example is extreme, and the society he describes is so obsessed with the idea that people make it on their own, by their own natural and potential abilities, that they basically put up as many barriers as possible to stop parents, peers, and teachers interfering with the development of the child. This develops to the extent that boarding schools and workplaces become a kind of surrogate family for intelligent people who were born into lower class families, and vice versa. You don't need to associate with them anymore. You belong here, with people of your own ability. Indeed, as Young writes, in an earlier age, the sumptuary laws passed by Henry VII to force lords to eat in the same great hall as their retainers were not only for the benefit of the retainers. In modern times, there is nothing to be gained from social mixing, in school, in residence, or at work, because the upper class now have little or nothing to learn from the lower. This is obviously not the case in our current society, but was written to illustrate a point about the similarities between the systems we moved away from and the supposedly better system we are part of today. Meritocratic practices in reality cause most societies to stratify and adopt a new kind of dynasticism, whereby wealth and power and status, even morality, are still passed along to the offspring of wealthy, powerful, and status-rich people, just by new methods. Instead of passing along status directly, nepotism takes the place of job interviews. Private education is paid for by wealthy families to make children more competitive and secure them an even better education, which in turn secures them a better job with more money, which they can spend on their own children, and the cycle continues. Another problem with meritocracy is one of value judgments. Talent is morally arbitrary. In Young's case, it is presupposed that talent is good, and being intelligent, smart, or hardworking is meritorious, which, as we remember, is a moral claim. But in reality, talent is just talent. You can be the most useless person in the world and still be moral. The same goes for the other side of the equation. Effort and hard work are not inherently moral. You could work just as hard to hurt people as to help them. But meritocracy has another more insidious consequence when it comes to equality. When you're at the top and you believe you have earned everything you have through your merit, and that people who get ahead all work hard, this reinforces that you belong where you are. As a consequence, you become morally superior to those people below you. Some members of the meritocracy, as most moderate reformers admit, have become so impressed with their own importance as to lose sympathy with the people whom they govern, and so tactless that even people of low caliber have been quite unnecessarily offended. This is despite the fact that you might have had a better upbringing, better education, more opportunity, higher social economic status, or simply be gifted with a high intelligence of the sort that an IQ test measures. The people at the bottom also start to feel this way, like they have no one to blame for their failures but themselves. Regardless of everything going on against them, they think they just didn't work as hard or genetically were never equal. They are just less. Meritocratic thinking, even in the mild aspirational form we have today, encourages elitism and hubris in the winners, denigrates and shames the losers, and then makes them both believe that they belong where they are, that morally speaking, that is what they are. In short, you start to think that the inequality you witness, experience, and are part of is justified. Young's ultimate point in his book is this: a society that is justly unequal causes discomfort, upheaval, and discord to a level that an unjustly unequal society does not. This book was written a very long time ago, and I'm not sure how accurate that is now. Things can get pretty uncomfortable. There's a lot of upheaval as well. The visibility of inequality means that any amount of it can invite revolt, and people really are getting sick of it. But I think this description of justice and equality is still correct. It's recognizable with the rise of social media that there is pushback everywhere. Take a day to look at Twitter. Anytime someone says that certain people work harder and that's why they have more money, it explodes with people not denying the inequality, but instead denying the idea that it is justified. Conversely, when a person points out that our society is not fair, it's pretty hard not to agree with them. Unless you're one of those wealthy elites who thinks everyone gets what they work for, they might say that it is fair and that you haven't worked hard enough. On second thoughts, maybe don't take a day to look at Twitter. It's a phenomenally unhealthy place to be. You can, however, follow me on Twitter and also Instagram and Facebook, links in the description. The idea of just inequality is a pretty hard pill to swallow for anyone. Unjust inequality is just our current reality. It has a certain solidarity to it in that we can walk down the street and know we are all, to some degree, members of a shared victimhood of fate. That public sense of belonging is not to be underestimated. When it comes to just inequality, universal basic income is a good way to conceive of this. If we were to imagine a meritocracy where some people are less meritorious and some are more meritorious, we might have universal basic income that's scaled to our merit. Under such a system, you wouldn't be able to complain that other people receive more money than you. After all, this unequal distribution is justified on the basis of merit. We start to see again that this idea of just inequality is undesirable and solidifies that stratification of class. But this isn't a side effect of meritocracy, it is by design. Young writes that meritocracy is about efficiency and the public good. It's about putting smart people in positions where they can effectively be utilized, but it also makes society embrace efficiency as a meritorious and moral pursuit. This in turn makes educated people into deserving people and less educated people into undeserving people. Class is inevitable. Castes or classes are universal, and the measure of harmony that prevails within a society is everywhere dependent upon the degree to which stratification is sanctioned by its code of morality. There are other types of meritocracies out there that we could talk about for hours, but that's some basic background for you. If you want to know more about different types of meritocracies and also the flaws that accompany them, I do highly recommend the book The Tyranny of Merit by political philosopher Michael Sandel, especially the section on egalitarians. While it's safe to say we do not live in an absolute meritocracy, we do generally see it as an ideal to strive for, without really thinking about the flaws inherent in it. In fact, when the term was coined by Young, he intended it to be a warning, but he lived long enough to see it become an explicit and announced goal of the Blair government in the UK. Putting aside our conception of what meritorious acts are in the first place, and assuming that we do have a moral claim to something if we work hard and have a measurable level of merit, the question still remains how much of that final result is actually within our control. The very idea of merit drives out divine grace, destiny, and chance, and obscures the real reason for success. Merit tells you that everything you achieve is your doing. It's your hard work, and you deserve whatever success you get. But likewise, if you get nothing, it teaches you that you have been found wanting, and that you must deserve nothing. The role of chance in our lives is so often overlooked. If you have good genes, or you're really naturally talented in a certain area, those things were given to you. You cannot claim to have deserved them. You didn't work for them, you just have them. Now, if that gets you a really great job, then good for you. But you can't really claim to have deserved that job either. Those talents are only highly employable or well paid because the society in which you live values them. And that's likewise not something you worked for. If you had been born in a different country or a different time, then that job may not even exist. It is often said within my industry that it's a shame Mozart never got his hands on a synthesizer, which may be true, but it also may not be true. If Mozart were born 250 years later, he may never have become interested in music at all. And if he had been born to a tribe in the Amazon, he certainly wouldn't have been. This is equally true for people like Marie Curie, Shakespeare, Michael Jordan, any figure to which we associate merit and hard work. If you were to say that Mozart would always have been great, you would have to qualify that statement. Common reasoning would be something to this effect. The kind of person Mozart was would ensure his success. He was an inquisitive and hard-working individual. And you might say because of that, he has great merit. To invert this, that sounds a lot like a wealthy and powerful person who was born into the upper echelon of society, looking down on the destitute and saying, those people aren't successful because they lack the right attitude. They're lazy, they're negative, they could do it, but they don't try. And you might say those people have less merit. In reality, Being one of those great and meritorious people is a combination of the right time, the right place, the right opportunity, and a hell of a lot of luck. Sometimes there's a man. I won't say a hero, because what's a hero? Sometimes there's a man. And I'm talking about the dude here. Sometimes there's a man. Well, he's the man for his time and place. He fits right in there. And that's the dude. If we indeed did want to live in a total meritocracy, we would have to consider how in control we are over our own lives, what even has merit and how to approach that merit, who helps you along the way, and how they were in a situation to help you at all. One of the biggest problems of meritocracy comes down to exactly this: chance. Chance poses a real threat to how you actually measure merit. Were we to allocate people their station and their career on the basis of what they are genetically and intellectually best suited for, as in the world described by Young, we would be ignoring the majority of chance while wholly embracing another. Without knowing which factors are due to chance, then you can't really assign merit in any logical way. A lively sense of the contingency of our lot can inspire a certain humility. There, but for the grace of God, or the accident of birth, or the mystery of fate, go I. Such humility is the beginning of the way back from the harsh ethic of success that drives us apart. It points beyond the tyranny of merit towards a less rancorous, more generous public life. It may be correct to say someone who does less than another with their life has contributed less. That's not the issue. The issue is that you're implying that the scope of their contribution is under their control, and that it somehow determines how morally deserving they are, how good they are. If you want to know more about the role of chance and also survivor bias, which explains our tendency to trust the lucky, Veritasium and Size Psych both have really great videos about them. I'll link them below in the description. We'll move on from chance now because the conversation gets really regressive. A direct comparison to determinism is unavoidable at some point, and that's a whole field of philosophy on its own. There are many problems with meritocracy. Measuring merit in a way that makes sense is only useful if we consider the reason for which it was created, and even then we have a fundamental problem of how to measure it. Additionally, both in terms of Young's portrayal and in terms of our own aspirations for a more meritocratic world, lies a conversation about what we value. This conversation has been developing for a very long time, but there's one area that's very highly valued and which has always drawn far more claims of merit than any other. Part 2. Education. Higher education now, and earlier in history education in general, is an influential part of the cultural zeitgeist of the West. The meritorious idea that you can make it if you try really only developed once some level of education was already a widespread phenomenon. Consider how we have already talked about how meritocratic thinking solidifies not just power, but bestows moral authority on people who are already at the top. Now consider the bastion of prestige and wealth that academic achievement represents, particularly university education. These institutions are not arbiters of what is good, they teach what is right, yet the moral prestige attached to a university education is huge. While Young writes about a fictional society, Michael Sandel writes about present-day America. We're no longer in the realm of fiction. In 2019, the college admissions scandal was revealed to the world, in which over 750 families were involved in bribery and criminal conspiracy to bias or outright cheat the selection process in top universities in the US. When commenting on the scandal, Sandel notes the motive for the bribes involved and the public belief about college education in general. Paradoxically, merit is the gift the cheating parents wanted to give their kids. If all they really cared about was enabling their children to live in affluence, they could have given them trust funds. But they wanted something else, the meritocratic cachet that admission to elite colleges confers. The plain fact is that college education is firmly associated in the public mind with personal advancement, upward social mobility, market value, and self-esteem. And if enough of the American people believe that one must attend college in order to be accorded respect and confidence, then the very unanimity of opinion makes the generalization true. Education then, at least at its apex, is less about maintaining wealth or acquiring skill as it is a kind of proof of morality, achieved by those who are meritorious enough to qualify for admission and graduation. There is a prevailing belief in higher education, especially university, being an uplifter or something that brings people out of poverty and allows social and economic mobility. We will get to why this is not the case, but before we get to university, there's still the idea of admission. I'm not so familiar with how it works in other countries, but the education system in Australian high schools totally throws out the window the idea that different things have different values to different people. Is art more meritorious than finance or less? We already have those judgments, they're socially ingrained, but I'm not sure how it works in other countries. In Australia, certain subjects in the high school curriculum are worth more than others. Physics and chemistry are worth more than mathematics and biology, which is worth more than literature or music, which are worth more than drama, agriculture, and horticulture. So if you want to get a good score for university admission, don't try hard at the wrong things or even things that are relevant to your intended course, just study the high-scoring subjects. Then there is the US admission exams. The SATs are more highly correlated with income than they are with IQ or previous test scores. This is because the SATs can be tutored, so wealthier families dedicate more time and have better tutors than poorer families. With enough repetition of the format of SATs, you defeat the purpose of testing. So in one sense, our education system biases towards certain praised subjects and denigrates others, making those subjects academically unequal. Or in another sense, it allows for the explicit tutoring and corruption via wealth of a test that was designed specifically to avoid the idea of money and status affecting university entry. The Scholastic Aptitude Test was born of the promise to admit students based on academic merit rather than class and family pedigree. But today's meritocracy has hardened into a hereditary aristocracy. At this point, the rhetoric of "you can make it if you try" starts to feel a little hollow. But have no fear. In his book, The Tyranny of Merit, Michael Sandel writes that as many as 77% of American citizens believe that if they work hard, they can succeed economically and socially. That's obviously a pretty vague idea. What does success really mean? So let's contextualize that with another statistic. Of the people from the lowest 20% of the income scale who get into Harvard University on a scholarship, already an incredibly unlikely thing to happen, only 2% of those graduates rise to the top 20% of the income scale, which makes it lower than the national average of still only 4 to 7%. At the very least, we know that if that's what is meant by success, it's not likely. Here are just a few other countries in which you are more likely to rise in socioeconomic status than in the US. Germany, Spain, Singapore, Japan, Australia, Sweden, Canada, Finland, Norway, Denmark, Switzerland, Belgium, France, New Zealand, Malta, South Korea, and the People's Republic of China. Moreover, economic advantage and disadvantage in the US also carry over to the next generation more readily than any of these countries. So you have a slim chance to rise even if you work hard and attend university, and you have socioeconomic factors being passed down along family lines. What part of this exactly is not aristocratic? Michael Young also talks about hope, specifically misleading hope, and how it is used to subdue the volatile personalities of the masses of undeserving and unmeritorious workers. When that hope becomes a lie, and you realize that you won't rise, it's only marginally better than believing it is true and thinking you have failed, and this is where you belong. Either way, you're still at the bottom. Sandel writes of his experience of informing his students of this at Harvard and their responses. Some of my students argue that, even if the American dream is at odds with the facts, it is important not to spread the news. Better to preserve the myth so that people will continue to believe it is possible to rise as far as their talents and hard work will take them. This is the same view that the unnamed historian in Young's book touted when he said that class relies upon stratification being condoned by the morality of a society. We still have to decide as a society if that is the kind of world we want to live in. Sandel does admit that having a degree from a place of higher learning can help people rise and do better, but because of the nature of admissions alone, universities do more to entrench privilege than to help increase mobility. College graduates, especially from prestigious places, do have a major edge in landing lucrative jobs. But these schools have little impact on upward mobility because most of their students are well off in the first place. American higher education is like an elevator in a building that most people enter on the top floor. Despite this, the belief that higher education is a great equalizer persists, and is fundamentally not just incorrect, but also corrosive to the morale of the people who don't wish to attend or cannot qualify for higher education, or to whom their job prospects would not be improved at all by having a degree. Don't get me wrong, breaking down barriers to education is great, and equal opportunity is great, but not all education has the same prestige attached to it as a university degree. Community colleges around the world are receiving less and less funding every single year, and university is becoming the new expected form of education. Recently, the Australian government announced that it's scrapping the VCAL program, which is kind of like a semi-working, learn-on-the-job apprenticeship while you're in your last 2 years of high school. VCAL was a phenomenally successful program, but it always had a kind of semi-dropout reputation to it. It was perceived as less academic. Notably, the new program that's coming in to replace it will allow kids to take more academic subjects along with the traditional VCAL subjects, which again kind of implies that those subjects are less deserving because they are less academic too. This perception, much like the idea that people at the bottom belong where they are, has seeped into the psyche of the less educated. This adverse judgment of the less educated is not unique to elites. It is shared by the less educated respondents themselves. There are no indications that less educated people resist the negative attributions made about them. To the contrary, they even seem to internalize these adverse judgments. The less educated are seen as responsible and blameworthy for their situation, even by the less educated themselves. So education is in a weird place. It's highly valued and highly sought after, both for economic and social reasons, and by most, if not all, people. But it has also been so corrupted by the values we ascribe to it that it no longer acts as an equalizer that it perhaps once was. There is one area, however, in which higher education makes the playing field actively less equal than it was before. Part 3. Credentialism and Politics. Credentialism is the belief that people need a degree or certification in order to do a job competently or as a stepping stone to entry to a certain profession. Sometimes this is good. You want doctors who know what they're talking about, for example. But let's examine how credentialism affects politics. While only about 30% of the US population, for example, has a degree, almost everyone in US politics has an advanced degree. All around the world, this imbalance is present, but this is a very recent trend. Even 30 years ago, a huge amount of people in politics were not university educated. Some of the most highly regarded politicians of all time have had no formal education. In Australia, Paul Keating. In the US, Washington, Lincoln, and Truman. Even Churchill had no university education. And those are just leaders. Junior members of parliament were even less likely to have degrees. This is because there is more to being a good civil servant than academic education. There is an understanding of the common good, social solidarity, compromise, the ability to identify and empathize with other people and their views, and that thing nebulously called wisdom. As I said before, universities are not arbiters of what is good, they teach what is correct, and highly educated people often construct their political beliefs in the idea that right and good are one and the same. This decision is smart, therefore we don't need to talk about whether or not this decision is good. As the intellectual elite have taken a greater and greater role in politics over the last few decades, right versus wrong and just versus unjust have been replaced with smart versus dumb. This comparison is a particular favorite of progressive American presidents such as Clinton and Obama. A huge factor driving this shift is that politics has become so partisan that saying something is smart rather than right or moral or good is a way of avoiding having to hash out democratic disagreements. But such disagreements lie at the heart of democratic politics. You do no one any favors by avoiding it. Sandel says that the problem with smart as a political justification is that the more policy making is described as a matter of smart versus dumb, the greater the case for having smart people, experts and elites, decide things, rather than allowing citizens to debate and decide what policies to enact. This highlights just how close we are to aristocracy in our current political system. We have a small section of the elite population as elected officials, working with other small groups of highly credentialed and wealthy experts and consultants, legislating and making smart decisions for the other 70% of the population. This is credentialism at work. Perhaps if we had more people who hadn't been through higher education in politics, we would have a more representative political system, and maybe a bit less voter apathy. There is a reason people say there is no one like them in politics anymore. I'm not saying we need people in politics who don't believe in the shape of the earth, or who listen to Nickelback. But the more that college is not about actual merit, and the more it is about social status and wealth, the less valid a belief in credentialism becomes anyway. Perhaps people who are smart enough and had a genuine desire to go to college but could never afford it, or whose professions did not require a degree, are exactly what we need in politics. The same way we need more minority viewpoints. As it currently stands, virtually no one in the American political system can say they've had that experience of not being able to afford or go to college. This is where we have to talk about Obama. Not as an individual, you understand, but insofar as he most properly represents the liberal and elite shift in attitudes and language. Unfortunately for everyone, the whole idea of democracy is that everyone gets a chance to be heard, and that includes the people that, politically speaking, are categorized as dumb, just as much as the smart people. Obama's language in general is littered with references to smart things, whether that be smart technology, smart policy, but he also tends to say things like this. The biggest challenge we're going to have over the next 10, 15, 20 years is to return to a civic conversation in which, if I say this is a chair, we agree this is a chair. Now we can disagree on whether it's a nice chair, whether we should replace the chair, whether you want to move it over there, but you can't say it's an elephant. What Obama did there was a little sneaky, and I have to believe he knew what he was doing. By framing the terms of a debate before it even occurs as, my idea is smart, your idea is dumb, he goes a long way to winning the debate before it has even started, again avoiding those debates upon which democracy relies. Sandel also picks up on this. The idea that we should all agree on the facts as a pre-political baseline and then proceed to debate our opinions and convictions is a technocratic conceit. Political debate is often about how to identify and characterize the facts relevant to the controversy in question. Whoever succeeds in framing the facts is already a long way to winning the argument. Our opinions direct our perceptions. They do not arrive on the scene only after the facts are cut and dried. This is not a comparison that only progressives make. The same is true for conservatives. The problem is that the dumb-smart dichotomy has replaced the traditional right-wrong dichotomy. Meritocratic thought is what led to such credentialism in politics, because it's not just that idea that you need a degree to do a job, it's coupled with the belief that you haven't proven your merit yet. You don't morally deserve that job. Credentialism then affects politics by pushing out less educated people and weakening democratic debate. Ultimately, the problem with our current system of education and credentialism is as follows. By giving society any direction, really, you weaken individual choice in how people want to actually live their best life and what they define as success. Meritocracy pushes this as far as it can go. In Young's book, everyone has their place in a society decided upon by the people at the top, who likewise decide what is valued. When certain people are better than others, better paid, better valued, better socially rewarded, they make the jobs which aren't as well rewarded less dignified. It's a conflation of something being more valuable and thus being more good. Something that's worth considering is that this structure of elites and experts sitting in a superior position and deciding what makes someone meritorious, let alone deciding how a country is governed, is similar in many respects to societies in which the common people do not have the right to vote. Democracy relies upon the voices of all its people, and politics as it stands is not even pretending to be representative, but especially with regards to the ones it denigrates as dumb. Meritocracy is a bit of a buzzword. It's a system that so many people believe in, and without thinking about its implications, it's easy to see why. It sounds like a great idea, but it undermines so many of our current values. One of the biggest problems of meritocracy is that there is no good way to measure human worth, and merit doesn't even come close. Additionally, the role of chance is rarely considered, and meritocracy builds on this and reinforces the idea that where you end up is your doing, and whatever it is, that's where you belong. Higher education has become a reinforcing element of meritocratic thought, and while supposedly increasing mobility and equal opportunity, it very rarely ends out that way. But there is even a fundamental flaw in the way we think of mobility and equal opportunity. Those are necessary remedies to our current inequality. They're not positive so much as neutral. They're the very definition of how our society should function. You might brag that your car drives really fast and has really nice stripes, but you don't brag that it just turns on. Credentialism developed out of a combination of meritocratic thought and our current system of higher education. It tells us that people are moral and deserving if they are credentialed, the implications of course being that the inverse is also true. That's pretty much the end of part 1. We'll continue the conversation in part 2 of this video, where we'll explore a bit more about how meritocracy affects the lives of real people. But I'll leave you with this quote from the Harvard University admissions website. You sometimes have the nasty feeling that you could take all the thousands of applications, and you could throw them down the stairs, pick up any 1,000, and produce as good a class as the one that will come out of the committee meeting. If that's not telling, I don't know what is. That's it for this half of the video, but as usual I want to leave you something to go away and listen to at the end of each video. For this one, seeing as we're talking about merit and what people deserve, one of my favourite albums is The Plague by the lesser-known band Deaton. It's a really cool prog rock, new wave of British heavy metal style concept album, which I came across years ago now and still one of my favourites to listen to. Very original sound and greatly underappreciated. And hey, it's called The Plague, that's topical too. I'll link it below if you want to have a listen or some way we can buy it, if I can find a link where you can actually buy it. I'm not sure if it's still available. Part 2 of this video will be coming soon. Comment, share, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. I hope to see you next time.